Probably the most widely used and most widely accepted method and metric for analyzing a player's or a club's performance is the expected goals model. This model is probably the best model when it comes to trying to strip out randomness for explaining a club's or a team or a player's performance. Now, a real expected goals is calculated in a much more complicated way.
But I see it better now, 'cause everything you do only says you gotta figure it out.
What's up guys, George Lyons here, welcome back to the Suckonomics YouTube channel and you're watching The Rounds. As usual guys, before we hit off today's episode, just gonna let you know to hit that subscribe button if you are new. If you like football content, football finance, football economics, that sort of stuff, then this is the channel for you. So hit that subscribe button and continue watching. Today's episode is gonna be a bit different. It's something that I've said that I would do for a long time, but I just haven't really been getting around to do it and I really wanna make sure that I do it properly. That is talking about expected goals and variations of expected goals, what they're used for, why they're done. I would show you how to calculate it, but it is very complicated how to calculate it because there's so many different models, but I will talk about it in depth and why people use it. But before we do get into expected goals, I want to talk about why expected goals exist, why people use it. The origins of expected goals, a lot of people talk about it as if it's Moneyball. A lot of clubs use it, but the first thing that people think when they think of Moneyball is Billy Beane with the Oakland Athletics in baseball in the MLB. He gets a lot of credit, but the reality is expected goals and talking about statistics in football has been around a lot longer than that. It just hasn't been implemented until in the last 20 years, which just happens to be when the Oakland Athletics started using statistics and the Moneyball approach. The reason why the Oakland A's use statistics to try and get around things in baseball is because they just don't have the money to be able to compete with all the rest of the clubs. So if they want to be successful, like the quote in the film, if you will try and play like the Yankees in here, you'll lose to the Yankees out there because you just can't compete for the same players. So they needed to find another way, and that is how they came across statistics, and I think it was on base percentage, which is the amount of times that each player would get onto base. And yeah, if you have a higher on base percentage, chances are you're going to get more points or runs. I don't know how baseball works, but you get the idea. But the reason why they did this is because they are trying to find a way that paints a picture of how clubs and players are actually performing as opposed to their output. And this is something that is very relevant in football. We see this all the time. We see like an underdog that just happens to have a really great season and they end up getting like European football, and the next season they end up getting relegated or very close to that. You see it all the time with clubs who get that like magic 7th or 8th position, like when Burnley got into the Europa League and then the next season they nearly got relegated. Now when you look at it from the outside point of view, you'd think that wow, they did really great, and then all of a sudden with the same players, the same manager, everything like that, it didn't work anymore. How does that make any sense? These players didn't forget how to play football, the manager didn't forget how to motivate his players. This is what we call in football and in other sports an element of randomness. And you hear all the time with sports pundits, they talk about how the table doesn't lie. It's actually the other way around. The table is always lying, and that is a great mindset to have if you are a statistician or a gambler. But why? Well, in all sports there is this element of randomness. The only thing is that a lot of sports are high scoring, so like basketball, baseball, there is a lot of room that can sort of mitigate that randomness. Football, however, is very different. It's traditionally a very low scoring game. The amount of randomness that contributes to goals in football has a higher effect on the outcome of football matches. And in a traditional season, we'll take the Premier League for example, there's only 38 games, which sounds like a lot, but when you take in a sample size, 38 is a very small sample size, so that is not enough to be able to try and cancel out this randomness. So this is how in some seasons, some clubs really overperform and some clubs seem like they're underperforming. So it's very important to not take literally the amount of points as the right way to identify how well a club has performed. So how should you be looking at a club's performance? Well, goal difference is a good start to have a look at how a club is actually performing. Obviously, scoring way more than you are conceding is a good sign to see that you are consistently performing better attacking and you've got a decent defensive record. Obviously, having a higher goal difference shows that you are more deserving of winning points, and yeah, it's a strong sign that you can consistently be able to win games. A low goal difference or even a negative goal difference is obviously not a good sign of a long-term sustainable success, because if you have a negative goal difference, the chances are there's going to be more games where you are losing, or a low goal difference means that there's going to be a lot of games where it's cutting it close, where there's a lot of 1-0s, 2-1s, maybe 1-0 losses, and that means that the chances of you winning games is obviously still lower. Either way, if you're in the top half of the Premier League with a negative goal difference or a really low goal difference close to 0, you are really overachieving. Now, a really high league position with a really low goal difference or even a negative goal difference is what we call an extremely effective goal distribution. Now, all goals in football are obviously very important, but not all goals are equally as important as others. So let's say, for example, there has been 8 goals scored over 2 games. You have scored 2 goals in those 2 games, and the other 2 teams between them have scored 6 goals. That's a lot of goals scored against you. That is a -4 goal difference. However, you might have won the first game 1-0 and then lost the other game 6-1. You've still got 3 points, which is a lot of points in football, especially from just 2 games. Now, saying that you got half the points available paints a picture that, wow, you're actually doing pretty good. But the reality is, you got a -4 goal difference, which really isn't sustainable. Another very easy and important metric to analyze performance is a shot differential, which is the difference between shots taken and shots faced. Now, it statistically makes sense and is proven that a club with a higher shot differential than another club with a lower shot differential is performing better and is more likely to win games. Now, a club that has a positive goal difference but a negative shot differential is a sign of a club that is overachieving in terms of shot conversion rates, which is an indicator of unsustainable success. And this is a problem because when we have a look at, say, for example, Newcastle United in, I think it was the 2011-2012 season, they finished 5th place. And if you remember, this was really funny because this is when Alan Pardew got given that 8-year unbreakable contract. And very quickly, the next season, it turned very sour because they almost got relegated and eventually sacked Alan Pardew. And only recently had that contract been paid off. So he was getting paid that entire time, which is just ridiculous. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that when Newcastle United were in 5th place and they were just flying, everything just seemed to go in. This was like a great thing. Newcastle United were back to their best again. But when you have a look at what I just talked about, their shot differential and their goal difference, just something as simple as these metrics, this paints a real picture of what was happening. I think they only had like a +5 goal difference for finishing 5th. And I'm pretty sure their shot differential was negative. Like it was something stupid like that. But what happened here with the outcome of giving Alan Pardew a 8-year unbreakable contract, which obviously would never happen these days. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Newcastle United were back to their best and, you know, 5th place back in European football. They deserved it. They won the games. They played with a lot of heart. These are all these intangibles that really blind people to what is actually happening. This is something that we call outcome bias, which a lot of people, especially in football, fall victim to, where success turns luck into genius. And everyone thought Alan Pardew at the time was a genius for their smart recruitment because they obviously signed a lot of players from the French lower leagues. And yeah, it was silly. Looking back, it was just silly. But there are other metrics as well, and probably the most widely used and most widely accepted method, a metric for analyzing a player's or a club's performance is the expected goals model. This model is probably the best model when it comes to trying to strip out randomness for explaining a club's or a team or a player's performance. All expected goals is a model to try and best explain what is happening that contributes to a goal, because if you can explain how many times a club or a player is expected to score, that is the best way to say that they are performing at their best, and you can see which team is more likely to win. If you've ever done data analytics or econometrics, if you're at university or just anything to do with data analysis, you'd know that when you're trying to come up with a model, all it is just something that try and best explains the results that you've got. Sort of like a line of best fit, which is like linear regression. Now, like any model, unless it is a straight line, all the points are passing through this line of best fit, nothing is going to be 100% accurate. The idea is if you can strip out all the randomness and actually have a number to explain what player and what club is performing at a certain level, then you can predict things in the future or try and work on their strengths. Now, the very basic calculation for expected goals, which no one uses in real life football, this is just something that you can get a decent idea of what expected goals is. What you do is you have a look at all the goals that you've scored in a single game and then divide that by the amount of shots that you've taken in a game. And then what you can do, that is your expected goals. What you can then do is take the difference of that from the expected goals scored against, so the amount of goals you conceded divided by the shots faced, and that is your net expected goals. What you can then do to get a better idea on average net expected goals is add up all the net expected goals that you've had over the past 100 games and then find the average of that. If you have a high net expected goals, that's obviously a good indication that you are performing very well and it's a sustainable success. If you have a low net expected goals, then it's obviously not very sustainable over a long period of time. So if you are high up on the table with a low net expected goals, then you're obviously overachieving. And vice versa, if you have a high net expected goals and you're low down the table, you're just underperforming, just unlucky. But this isn't the actual expected goals model. Now, a real expected goals is calculated in a much more complicated way. It's actually calculated by taking historical data on previous shots taken from particular positions, different forms of shots, and which of those shots result in a goal. This provides a probability, like a number, something that shows what the chances are of you scoring from a particular position in a particular game based off of historical data. Then you add up all these expected goals, and that gives you sort of like an expected goals you're supposed to score within a game, which is a decent indicator of how you're performing. Because think of it like this: if you're having lots of different shots, yes, you can say, oh, we had like 25 shots compared to their 2. But if those 25 shots are all absolute screamers from 40 yards out, the chances of you scoring those as opposed to a tap-in or a penalty is obviously a lot lower. And that's what it does. It highlights how good a particular shooting chance is based on how previous chances similar to that have resulted in a goal, which is actually really good for particular football clubs or particular players, because then they can see which areas in a football pitch they actually have a higher conversion rate. What type of shot are they really good at? Now, XG for a given shot is a probability, meaning that the number that you come out with is a number between 0 and 1. 0 being a 0% chance of scoring, which doesn't happen obviously very often, and 1 is a certain chance of scoring, which honestly that never happens because you're never certain of scoring from any position. This XG is calculated using many different factors, because there's not only how close you are to the goal, but there's also the angle that you've got from the goal. So if you are closer to the goal, obviously your XG is higher. If your angle with the goal is a lot narrower, then obviously it's a lower chance of scoring, so your XG is lower. The type of shot, so if it's you're kicking it or you're doing it with a header, whether it comes from a set piece, there are so many different factors that basically calculate your expected goals. Now, although XG doesn't actually take into consideration the type of player who is taking the shot, this is a good metric to try and find out who is performing above trend, who is an elite finisher. So it's a good way to find out who is a striker that is performing above trend and can cut it. So it's good in terms of player trading. And you see that all the time with players like Harry Kane, Lionel Messi. These are players who can continuously and consistently perform above their expected goals, and that is obviously a sign of a world-class player. Now, of course, when it comes to player trading, you wouldn't use expected goals to look for a new right back or anything like that, but you might use a similar system like expected clean sheets or expected chances created in the case of like Trent Alexander-Arnold, because there's a lot of wingbacks these days that are having a lot more attacking outputs. But what you can see is this is a great tool to see what players are performing better than what they ought to, or vice versa. And this is how clubs like Brentford, like other clubs, are finding players that are actually performing better than what their output suggests. Hence, they are undervalued in the market, and that's why they're able to turn over these great profits, because in the long run, these players, if they are consistently performing with a metric that is higher than what they're actually doing, then in the long run, they should be reaching those highs. Now, in terms of a club's performance, you can actually take expected goals and expected goals against and come up with another metric, which is expected points. Expected points says it on the tin, pretty much it's the amount of points you're expected to get from a game. If you can eventually come up with expected points for every single season, you can find out who's actually performing where they're supposed to be and who isn't, and it comes up with your own table. You can compare that with the table that you have at the end of the season, and that would generally paint a better picture of where everyone should have been. But the reality is, though, that no model is perfect, and it certainly cannot predict the future. Expected goals, expected points, all this sort of stuff doesn't mean to be taken literally. It can't predict the future, and that is because there is so much randomness in football. You can't strip out randomness, and any model doesn't mean that that is to be taken as a given. But what it does do, it paints a better picture of what has happened, and it helps analysts and statisticians, especially in football clubs, when it comes to recruitment or player development, training, what to focus on. It identifies strengths and weaknesses, and that is so important when it comes to long-term success in football. And that's why clubs like Brentford have been on the up. That's why clubs like Liverpool have been able to win the league and the Champions League, and so on. I am actually trying to learn how to create expected goal models and coding and all that sort of stuff using Python over the holidays. I know that sounds heaps fun, doesn't it? But that's something that I'm really interested in. So once I get a better idea of how to calculate it, hopefully one day I'll be able to show you guys how to calculate it yourselves, how to visualize it using data visualization softwares, and be able to come up with your own versions of how to value players, which is something that really excites me. But yeah, I hope you found this video both entertaining and educational. If you did enjoy today's episode, please leave us a like. We really appreciate that. We are trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, guys, before the end of the year. We really want to hit that one. It's a milestone that we set at the start of the year, so if you can help us do that, that'd be massive. But yeah, do hit the subscribe button, guys, and apart from that, thank you very much, and I will catch you very soon.
Being a stranger to what we lost, I'll keep my guard down and hope it comes back around, cause I still just feel like I'm gonna keep running inside.